Hi, everyone, and welcome to Octopus 101. My name is John Bristowe. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you for your time and attention. Really happy to have you. This is a live webinar. We have folks from all over the place. Hello from California, Montreal in the house. Bienvenue. What else? We've got folks from India. Wow, it must be really early in the morning there. And we've got folks from frozen Northern Ohio. I'm from Canada. I know the winter very well, so welcome. Thanks for joining us today. This is Octopus 101. This is our monthly webinar series that we run to show you Octopus Deploy, tell you everything about it that you need to know. It's a really good primer. It's a really good way to really get a good idea of what Octopus is all about. Perhaps you're looking at automating your deployments. Perhaps you're looking at ways in which you can take automation to the next level for your software delivery. You're in the right place. This is the place to be to learn everything you need to know about Octopus itself. So, as I said before, my name is John Bristowe. Thank you for joining us today. We really appreciate it. This is a webinar that will be running for about 30 minutes to an hour, depending on where we go. It's very demo heavy. My purpose here is to basically show you everything that you need to know about Octopus. Answer any of your questions, so feel free to submit your questions to the Q&A pane or to the comments section where you're joining from. So if you're on, say, YouTube or LinkedIn, you can just submit a comment and that will show up here. We're using a platform called StreamYard, which will allow us to see those questions and we'll answer them live, which is great. If you need to reach me, you can reach me at this email address here. I'm happy to take your questions. Feel free to submit them, and we'll answer them the best we can. So this is what you're going to learn during the webinar. So this is my commitment to you. So how Octopus works and why you should use it. And the reason why I think the why part is really important is because oftentimes you'll look at a technology, like folks will show you like, hey, there's this awesome technology, you should be using it. And it's kind of hard to understand, like, where does this fit? Why would I use this, etc. And so I really want to spend a little bit of time talking about not only what it is that Octopus does, but more importantly, why you should be considering it for your solutions. Automated deployments, continuous delivery, etc. These are really important things that will enable your teams to accelerate in their development and their deployment. CI/CD is a very important space, and so obviously I'm hoping that you're here because you want to do that. The next thing you'll learn is a little bit about what we consider Octopus fundamentals. These are terms that we use in Octopus to describe things like a project, a deployment process, a release, an environment, a life cycle. These and other sorts of terms you'll be learning throughout this webinar. And hopefully by the end of this, you'll be able to, go to a cocktail party about Octopus, and you'll be able to tell everything. You'll be able to understand what people are describing when they describe things like a deployment process. Next, we'll take a look at how to create a deployment process from scratch. I'll show you what that looks like. We'll talk about what are called steps, which are the building blocks of the deployment process. And then finally, we'll show you how to trigger a deployment process using a CI process or server. A CI is continuous delivery. Continuous integration. Sorry, I'm getting my terms mixed up. Continuous integration. Basically, it's a process by which you will build and test your code continuously. The benefits for that are obvious, but that's typically where life starts for a CI/CD pipeline. And so, obviously, for us to do our work, we need to be notified that there's work to be done. And so that's where a CI process will notify Octopus. We'll show you how that happens in the context of GitHub Actions. We'll also take a look at Azure DevOps. We understand how to do this with a lot of CI solutions out there. There's Jenkins, there's TeamCity, there's BuildKite, there's all kinds of solutions out there, and we've seen them all. So don't worry, we'll show you how that works. All right, great. No more questions, which is awesome. Well, maybe not, but if there are any questions, feel free to ask. If you miss anything throughout this webinar, don't worry. This is being recorded, as I said before, and you'll get a recording email after the fact, but you also see this up on our YouTube channel. So don't worry, you'll see everything there. All right, so let's set the stage of what Octopus is and why you should think about using it. If for no other means, you should be thinking about automating your deployment processes. So on the left, you have your developers. On the right, you have the places where they want to put their code. And missing from this picture, obviously, is our users and customers, but we're going to assume that they're able to get to our applications pretty easily. Somewhere in the middle, we're producing code in the form of artifacts, and these artifacts are there in the forms of things like zip archives, images, config scripts, etc., all sorts of stuff that goes into some form of code repository. And oftentimes, what you'll find is that these sort of processes require a pipeline. So that's why it's, typically what we describe as left to right. When you hear terms like shift left, what you're doing is you're describing moving processes more to the left, more towards the developer side of things so that they can do things earlier in the pipeline. But essentially, where you want to think of where Octopus lives is right between your CI processes or build server and your deployment targets. And oftentimes, this is left as an afterthought. A lot of CI processes that you see out there, you see some examples here. You got Jenkins, you got TeamCity, you got Bamboo. Maybe not so much Bamboo anymore, but you got Circle CI, you've got GitHub, etc., GitLab. These and other processes often leave deployment as an afterthought. If you look at what capabilities they have for deployments, it's almost like you have to roll it yourself. They'll give you some notion of maybe environments, but that's about it. Everything else you have to handcraft yourself through YAML, through scripts, etc. And there's no semblance or order or single place to go to figure out what's happening in terms of your deployments. That's where Octopus lives. That's where Octopus does its work in around continuous delivery, and that's our goal for providing this. Now, understanding more about the why, obviously, when you're automating stuff on the left, where you're doing a lot of manual automations, and you're doing automations that give you the ability to do scripts, etc., things can get really gnarly. Things get really hairy because you've got so many different scripts out there. They don't evolve over time, etc. So what we like to think of is with Octopus Deploy, you get a little bit of sanity around that process. You get integration automatically with solutions that are quite popular in the ecosystem for things like auditing, service approval, etc. These and other sorts of capabilities are often missing in an automation script. You have to roll this yourself. In addition to that, if you're taking a look at what's available out there in terms of other capabilities, like let's take one scenario, which is like GitHub. With GitHub, you have any number of integration points. So this is a high-level architectural diagram of what we do with GitHub, and we'll show you some of these things in today's webinar. I'll actually show you a demo of GitHub Copilot if you guys are at all interested. So with GitHub, you have the ability of integrating through with series of GitHub actions that we've built for creating releases, for doing deployments, etc. We also have a GitHub app that you can integrate with as well. And then once you get your artifacts and processes set up in Octopus Deploy, you can start instituting policy. You can start integrating CD patterns like blue, green, canary, rolling deployments, etc. These and other patterns you can integrate directly. And of course, all of this is backed by a lot of stuff that we have built into the product, which we'll take a look at around things like auditing, RBAC, role-based access control, etc. DORA metric integration. These and other capabilities are really where Octopus shines, and so we'll take a look at all of this. And this is not exclusive, obviously, to GitHub. Obviously, if you're taking a look at other scenarios where, let's say you're using Jenkins or maybe GitLab, for example, these scenarios definitely carry forward. We have integration with backend artifact repositories like Artifactory. You can integrate with containers for Docker or Kubernetes support, for example. These and other sort of capabilities are there. And of course, we support all the major targets. Whether you're on-prem, in the cloud, it doesn't matter. They are just targets to us, and we are able to deploy to them quite easily. All right, that is enough preamble. We're 10 minutes in. Let's go ahead and get into a demo, my favorite part. All right, so for this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to just switch over to my browser and show you what Octopus Deploy looks like. So Octopus Deploy is what primarily people think of as Octopus Deploy is like the dashboard. So what you see here is the dashboard of Octopus Deploy. This is your single pane of glass, your one-stop shop for all your deployments. So what you see here is a list of projects and the state of their deployments for each one of the versions that we have. So along the left-hand side here, you can see I have my projects. And then across the top here, you'll notice that I have these words here. These are basically my environments. So I have environments like development, test, staging, pre-production, and of course production. And I can take a look at each one of these and get a sense of where are my projects in terms of their versions, whether or not projects have successfully deployed or not, etc. So these and other capabilities are available to me through the dashboard. Incidentally, if you want to play with Octopus, kick the tires yourself, you can sign up for a trial today. So if you go to our website, which is at octopus.com, you'll see a big green button down here saying start a trial. If you click that, you'll be able to not only set up a cloud instance, but if you want, you can also download and install the software yourself. So we have two options here. You can either host it yourself, or you can go ahead and set up a cloud instance. So just wanted to briefly mention that. But when you set this up, you'll see the dashboard, and the dashboard here provides you a context. So that's the high level perspective of this, but let's switch over to this instance I have here, and let's go ahead and create one from scratch, because what I'd like to do is kind of show you how to set this up. So over here in the top left-hand corner, I have this drop-down list, and I have basically what are called spaces. So a space is like an isolation boundary. When you need like kids. I don't know if you're a parent, but kids need their own rooms to live. A space is like that. It's an isolation boundary to keep your projects separated from each other. And there's a variety of reasons why you may want to do this. Oftentimes, Octopus Deploy is at the heart of a lot of dev teams and DevOps teams, and you may have different teams using the same Octopus instance. You want to separate concerns. You want to separate those teams from each other. Use a space to do that. So let's go ahead and create a new space here. And the reason why I'm doing this is because I want to show you the first run experience of what this looks like when setting this up for the first time. This will really provide some context for folks who are wondering what Octopus is all about. So I'm going to switch over to Octopus 101, this new space I've created, and you can see we have this nice first run experience. So as part of this first run experience, we provide you like a getting started video, we give you guides as well, etc. to get started. But what I'm going to do here is just start with the getting started process and show you along the way what things are. So let's go ahead and click the button and get started. So this is the first time we're creating a project. A project is a part or piece of your application that you want to put some deployment process around. So let's say you're building a website. Website typically has a web server, typically has a database, may have auditing capabilities, may have some observability capabilities as well. These might be considered like 4 projects available as part of this. So you can basically structure this any way you want, but if you have a deployment process you want to associate with your app, you'll typically put it in a project like this. So let's go ahead and obviously this is a hello world example, so we'll call this one Hello Octopus. Now underneath here, you'll notice I have this option here to say, where do I want to store my project process, settings, and non-sensitive values in the form of variables? I have the option of storing this inside of Octopus, or I can say I want this backed by a Git repository. This is a feature we have called config as code, and what this allows you to do is basically define all those settings that underpin projects in a Git repository. You might ask yourself, why would I want to do that? Well, a lot of DevOps and tech folks want to update their configs through a text file. They want to use branches, they want to use pull requests, they want to use Git, they want an audit trail in Git, etc. They want to be able to wrap process around that. Doing this way allows you to do that. Now, that's not to say you don't have process with Octopus, the built-in database that we have, but you can certainly back this by Git if you so wish. So we give you that option as part of this to do just that. We also give you some templates here for where you want to deploy to. I'm going to assume just nothing for now and just create a project. The next question it's going to ask me is, okay, what environments do you want to set up for your deployments? So environments are just semantic names for you to understand where your targets live. And targets are ultimately where software resides, whether it's in the cloud, on-prem, doesn't matter. But you have to come up with some environment names. And the reason why we do this is because as you go through environment progression and you promote releases, you're going to do so using environments. And that's why we give them. You can name these anything you want. You can have as many environments as you want. We give you 3, the canonical ones, which is development, staging, and production, but you can come up with any one. So we'll just assume the defaults and create them. All right, so now we're brought into what's called the process editor. This is where you construct your deployment processes. These are basically like recipes. So if you've ever made anything in the kitchen where, you pull out the 3x5 card, you're reading the instructions of the recipe, first take out the eggs, preheat the oven, add butter to the mix, etc., put it into a baking sheet. These are the instructions by which you make something, either whether you're baking, etc. A deployment process is similar to that. It's a series of instructions through what we call steps, and it runs those steps one after another or in parallel, depending on how you have it set up. And those steps define your deployment process. So from top to bottom, it's like start here, do this, then this, then this, and then you end with this. That is a deployment process. Now, a deployment process is not just like chuck some bits over the wall and put it on the web server and you're done. Oftentimes, they have a bunch of associated processes. An example might be, let's say I'm updating a database. I got to run a configuration script. I have to do a diff. I may have to check with my DBAs, is that okay, through a Slack message or a Teams message. I then want to do a manual approval of the diff. I then want to propagate that diff, and then I want to run a series of tests to see if that config change actually worked successfully. That's already 5 steps that I've defined just off the top of my head. That would be constitute a deployment process. So let's see how we can construct this. So you can see here in the process editor, I have a series of categories that I can use. So these categories range from everything from simple scripts to containers to infrastructure as code. So you can run plans via Terraform if you wish. We have integration with backend or cloud native services if you're using cloud in the backend, for example, server environments, obviously, and other things as well. So if we take a look at some of these that are available, you can see we have the ability to run scripts. We have the ability to integrate with containers, run plans via Terraform, integrate with AWS, GCP, Azure, etc. So you can see we can take any one of these and utilize it. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to utilize the most popular step we have. We've looked at our data, and everyone seems to like this step a lot, which is run a script. So let's go ahead and add this step to our deployment process. Now, when I do this, you're going to see a dialog that looks like this. Now, don't worry. I know that there's a lot of stuff coming at you here, but realize that these are basically meta properties associated with this step. What I've done here is the important part here is this part here. Step 1, run a script. So that's the first step I'm doing as part of a deployment process. Everything that's defined about that step is here. So oftentimes there's lots of conditions and meta properties you want to set for the run of a step. And these are things like what conditions you want to run, what's required, am I going to retry this step, etc. These and other settings you're going to specify here as part of this step configuration. Oftentimes you don't need to worry about them, but it does give you a level of control about how this runs as part of a deployment process. So if we take a look at how a script step works, you can see that the first question it's going to ask me is, where's this script coming from? Is it being defined inline? Is it coming from a Git repository, or is it coming from what we call a package? A package is like a zip archive or some form of distributable that we can get access to. And we have integration points with each one of these. So if I use a Git repository, you can see we provide integration with Git. If you're pulling it from a package, you can see we have integration with a variety of feed sources. So you can see I can set this up ahead of time. I can say, hey, I've got a Artifactory generic feed, or I've got an OCI registry feed for containers, etc. Or I'm pulling this from some other location. That's where I want to get my resources. You can set those up as feeds, and those are first class features available in Octopus. Now for this demonstration, because it's hello world, we're just going to go ahead and define the script inline. So we provide you this interface for you to define integration with a variety of script types. We also have the ability of, when you're writing these, injecting a bunch of variables. Now, variables are really a powerful concept because what they enable you to do is basically inject these values as part of your deployment pipeline. This is really nice because as you're using variables in context here, they allow you to make your scripts much more resilient to environment progression. What I mean by that is oftentimes things will change from environment to environment, and you don't want your scripts breaking as a result of that. So you'll utilize things like variables to take advantage of those capabilities. So because this is PowerShell, this is the equivalent of sort of printf or console.write, or choose whatever works for you. So I'll say hello Octopus. Now, one of the things that we do here is, sorry, that got nuked out. So I'll just go ahead and write that again. Hello Octopus. All right. So one of the things that we do as part of defining your deployment processes, we do validation along the way. So when I click on save here, you'll notice that I get an error. It says here, please specify one or more target tags for this script step to apply to. So a target tag is a tag is like a little, it's like a piece of a naming context to define what targets I'm going to run this script against. Now, I haven't defined any here, but I'm just going to assume that something that's been generated here. So hello Octopus targets. This tag will be applied to one or many deployment targets that I want to deploy to. So a deployment target might be an AWS cloud instance that I have. Maybe I have a Kubernetes cluster running somewhere. If I apply these tags to those targets, it will then flow that target accordingly. So once I click on save, you'll notice that I get a warning here that shows up. It says, hey, you don't have any targets defined as part of this tag. So let's just take a brief moment and look at targets. I know I'm kind of jumping around here, but I want to just briefly show this. We have the ability to add a variety of target tags as part of Octopus. So we have integration directly with Kubernetes, so you can install our agent if you wish. You have targets in the form of Linux, Windows, Mac, Azure, AWS. We have a feature called Cloud Region, which I'll talk about in a sec. But these are basically where you're running what we call Tentacle. Another name, it's synonymous with the word agent. It's basically a piece of software that we install for a target that you want to deploy to continuously. So you'll install this little bit of software, and what it does, it sets up an agent waiting for things to do. We call this Tentacle. If you've used anything like agent software before, where you install this little receiver of work, it's the same idea. So we have two different types of tentacles. We have listening tentacles and polling tentacles. Listening tentacles are basically an active port that you can query from Octopus if you wish. A polling tentacle will call home and say, hey, do you have any work for me to do? And this is how you connect basically your remote targets to Octopus as the central coordinator of deployments. So for this, I'm just going to create what we call a cloud region. This is basically a location that I can use if I wish for doing this demo here, but just call this one hello, and I'll define this across a variety of environments. These environments I defined earlier, so I can make this a target for each one of these environments. So I'm putting this cloud region available in each one of these names for an environment. This gives me environment progression capabilities. I can also specify a target here, so I'll give it the same name that I defined earlier. So hello Octopus targets, and then I can assume everything as the default. So I'll save this, and we'll just close this out. So we have this now defined. If we jump back to our process here, you can see we have our deployment process defined. We have it being deployed to this target. Everything's good to go. Now, if I wanted to, I could add additional steps here. I could say, like, let's add another step here. Maybe I want to do a step associated with Azure, for example. I could certainly do that. But for this demo, I'm just going to say, look, I'm good to go with this. Oh, sorry, I jumped into the wrong place. So I'm good to go with this. And now what I would like to do is I want to do an actual deployment. So let's go back to our deployment process here. And let's go ahead and what we're going to do now is we're going to create a release. So a release is basically a versioned snapshot of this deployment process that we're going to use to push to targets. The reason why we do this and the reason why snapshots are important is because oftentimes you'll see this if you do your own automations on deployments. If you have a deployment set up in script and it's not snapshotted, things like variables, things like packages, all that stuff can change at any point in time. And so if you don't snapshot this, things can go very, very badly. Oftentimes, what is assumed on day one of your automation journey will look completely different on day N of your automation journey because things will change along the way. New builds will get pushed. If you don't snapshot variables, for example, if you don't store the state of these things in a snapshot and version it, it's very hard to do environment progression. It's very difficult to control these and do things like rollback. So we snapshot this in a release. We keep it as a constant state, and then we provide that as a mechanism for doing deployments. That's what we call a release. So here you can integrate with semantic versioning if you want. I can give it variables to auto increment if I wanted to for version numbers. Doesn't really matter too much. I can add integrated release notes. I can have this constitute build notes if I want. I'm going to assume the defaults here and click save. And this is where we create this release. This is a snapshot of all the information that went into this deployment. So we have things like what lifecycle I want to target, which is the default lifecycle. Lifecycles are another thing altogether. But you can see here I have a lifecycle defined across 3 deployment environments. Have any packages I'm going to use. These are things like the DLLs, the zip archives, the tarballs, anything like that I want to use, including artifacts like imagery that I want to use as part of a website. If I want to, I can also take a look at the variables that are part of this release. We create a snapshot of that. You have the ability to update those variables if you so wish. But the reason why this is important, the reason why we create a release is so that we can have something that we can deploy easily. So once we define this, let's go ahead and now deploy this to development. The last thing we have to do before we do that is define the characteristics of this deployment. So do we want to deploy it now? Do we want to deploy it later? Do we want to set up a schedule for this? Do I want to give it priority? Another feature we have here is I can go in here and I can say, I can exclude certain steps from this deployment. This is sort of a last second or last chance scenario where I can say, you know what, this run script step, I don't want to run it. Don't worry about it. I'm obviously not going to do that here, but I have control over all of this. I can control all these things. And when I'm ready, I can go ahead and hit deploy. Now, what's happening here was we're brought into the release task summary. This is going to give me a rundown of everything that's happening for deploying to that cloud region I set up earlier. Cloud region is just a ephemeral worker that we have available through Octopus Cloud. But if I was targeting, say, a Kubernetes cluster or a web server or whatnot, I would see integration with that. So I've got a verbose setting turned on here. I can see everything that's happening in terms of the deployment itself. In addition to that, once this is done, I'll get a task summary. I get the nice sort of congratulations, you've done a deployment. This is just the first run experience. Obviously, when you automate this out, you're not really going to use the UI too much. You're going to automate this as part of a script or a CI process, which we'll take a look at. So this is basically to show you what it looks like through the UI. Down here at the bottom, you notice there's my hello message, hello Octopus. So we've done the script run successfully. And then if I come back here, you'll notice that inside this task summary, I can see all sorts of things. And this really speaks to the compliance, the traceability aspects of a deployment tool like this. I can see who ran it. I can see the history, who ran it, why it ran, etc., when it ran, etc. If I had anything else that went into this, like any pull request information, build information, I don't have any build information with this, but if I did through an integration with Git, I would see those changes propagate here. I'd be able to traverse that as well. But now if I come back to my dashboard, you can see now we have 001 now that has been successfully deployed to the development environment. So the development environment, wherever that is, whatever targets that encompasses, now has this version deployed to it. And if I wanted to, I could promote this to staging just through a click of a button. I can also just do this through an API or through the CLI or through integration points that we'll take a look at here. But this is essentially Octopus 101. This is, you've done a successful deployment, and now you're pushing out releases as part of this deployment tool. Now, obviously, there's a lot more parts and pieces to this, but essentially that's fundamentally the very basic Hello Octopus demo for this. If I'm curious at all about seeing where these things live, I can obviously take a look at each environment. I can start configuring things later on, etc. But there's lots of things we can take a look at here. So good stuff. All right, let's jump back to the slides. Obviously, there's a lot there. Don't worry, we're going to take a look at some other stuff as well. As I said before, a very demo-heavy webinar. This one, we'll talk a lot about some other scenarios here. So just wanted to showcase some other things here as part of Octopus itself. So these deployment processes can get pretty complex. The good thing here is we're giving you a way to represent this complexity through a visual representation. We give the ability to view your child steps and conditions associated with these steps. You can run these steps in parallel. You can have these based on conditions. We give you integrated markdown notes to show you what these steps mean. The reason why this is important, obviously, is because if you have more than one person using Octopus, you may want to give some explanation as to why these steps are constructed the way they are. As I mentioned before, you can have these steps run in parallel. You can also have them based on conditions. And then a nice little feature here is a feature called environment labels. This shows you what environments these steps will run on. The reason why this is important is because sometimes you may want only certain steps to run against certain environments. So a scenario might be, I'll define a generic deployment process, but then I only want certain things to run in certain conditions. So for example, let's say deploying to production is a very important deployment process, obviously, and I may want to introduce steps that only run when I'm deploying to that environment. So I may want to do what's called a manual intervention. A manual intervention is a step we have that requires a human to come along and approve a deployment to continue. I may want to mark that as a production only environment label for that. And so that will only run when I'm deploying to production. In all other cases, staging, development, doesn't matter, just go for it. YOLO deployment, etc. That's where you have that nice qualification against environments. Now, rounding this off a little bit, obviously there's a lot of reasons why you might use a tool. This is getting back to the arguments as to why. I've shown you a quick example here, but this really comes to the heart of the matter, which is you really want your deployments to be not only reliable, but you want them to feel risk-free. You want to be able to deploy on Friday. It's okay to deploy on Friday if you have a good deployment process. The reason why the Friday deployments are so shunned is because they basically do YOLO deployments. They're just like throw it over the wall and away you go and hope everything works. If you have a good deployment process defined, and you have everything well defined as part of your pipeline, you should be able to deploy on Sunday for what you want, right? So this is the idea. You want to free up that stress of doing deployment and give it to a tool that will do this with confidence and have built-in capabilities like rollback. This is something that's just built in out of part of Octopus. You can roll back deployments very easily. In addition to that, you also want to make sure that you can stay in sync with the ops side of DevOps. So we're doing DevOps here, but we haven't seen any ops yet. So where are the ops? We have a feature called runbooks built into Octopus. Runbooks are very similar to deployment processes. They're a series of steps that you can define to perform all kinds of routine or emergency tasks. And the reason why this is important is because oftentimes when you do deployments, there's things you want to do in addition to just the deployment itself. You may want to run backups. You may want to update servers. You may want to run checks, etc. You may want to restart websites if you're getting 500 errors, for example. So these and other types of operations, whether routine or emergency, you can define as runbooks. You can set them up with all the necessary configs and creds, etc., and then have them available as runnable runbooks. That's the idea there. By having a runbook here, you can provide a means of running these tasks quickly and easily without having to share creds in a way that's well defined. And so we really round out the scenario of development and operations for that purpose. Of course, if you're doing anything around things like containers or Kubernetes integration, we have support for that. We have built-in support for things like YAML, Helm charts. We actually have a Helm chart for Octopus itself. I got a question earlier. People were asking, do you use Octopus Deploy to deploy Octopus Deploy? And the answer is yes. We actually do eat our own dog food. So everything I've shown you in Octopus Cloud, we actually maintain and control in Kubernetes, and we deploy to that using Octopus. So we utilize a lot of these capabilities, like our built-in YAML support, Helm chart support for containers, we're actually using ourselves. So we're using this stuff ourselves as part of deployment. And this is a feature that we have support for that you'll see in more mature organizations around deployments, a feature called multi-tenancy. This is a really, really powerful feature. In fact, this is the one feature you see when you take a look at usage of Octopus Deploy, you really start to see the chart usage of multi-tenancy really ramp up the more months and years a customer has using this capability. Multi-tenancy is basically the ability to define or deploy to multiple customer types without having to duplicate deployment processes or integrate that within your application itself. What I mean by this is oftentimes you'll have an application that you want to look different depending upon the customer type. This can be based on a variety of factors. The one that everyone thinks of is geography or geo. So let's say you're in the US, you want different types of applications going to East US versus West US or Central. You can define those as tenants in Octopus Deploy and accordingly deploy to those tenants. So this is a really nice feature, and it's a extremely powerful feature that a lot of customers love when they start utilizing it. So this is something that is built in out of the box, multi-tenancy support. And of course, if you're looking at other capabilities around things like compliance or risk, or you're wanting to control the way that auditing is done, or the way that even deployments are done or approved, we have integration points with a number of technologies out there and solutions. So a few examples that we mentioned here are things like Sumo or Splunk, integrating audit logs with these backend services for a variety of reasons. These tools are really good at querying and collecting logs and traces. So we can output those streams to Sumo, Splunk, etc. We also have integration with other tools as well. So oftentimes you want to use this in concert with other tools for things like approvals or auditing. So two examples are like Jira Service Management or ServiceNow. Very common scenario where ServiceNow, you'll approve a deployment going out and we can integrate with that automatically. And you can approve a deployment from ServiceNow, which will flow down to Octopus, and Octopus will then do the deployment. So in that sense, Octopus serves to the request of an additional tool. So you can create these really nice tool chains and basically use the best of breed in terms of an ecosystem for your deployments, which is great. All right, let's jump into another demo. So I'll jump back into Chrome here. what I want to talk about now is how do we kick off a deployment? So you've seen how deployments are done. How does this happen in an automated context or an automation context? So over here, I'm inside of GitHub. Again, if you're using another tool, that's fine. We integrate with all the CI process products and processes. So here I am inside of GitHub. In GitHub, we define workflows in YAML. Take it for what that is. YAML's not my favorite environment, but there you go. So YAML is just basically a text version of a process, and this is where you do your CI or continuous integration, where you do a build and test process. But oftentimes people ask, like, okay, so how do I get a deployment done? Well, a deployment is done in the case of GitHub through actions. So actions are defined here. You'll notice that all these things are, if you use these tools, they all use the same terminology. So inside of GitHub, we have a series of steps, and these steps use what are called GitHub actions. Actions are little pieces of logic that you run one after another. It's very similar to steps in Octopus. So these are all actions here. So this is an action. Let's see. This is an action here, run action here. This is an action here. And so down here at the bottom, after we've done all our build and test, you'll notice that we have actions here for Octopus deploy. So these are actions that we have defined in the marketplace that I can use if I wish to create releases, do a deployment, update packages, push packages to Octopus, etc. So you'll define your deployment process still in Octopus, but when you're ready to automate it, that is, make it part of a pipeline, you'll add these actions to, for example, GitHub actions to kick off a release, for example. Now you'll find these, as I said before, inside of GitHub Marketplace. So if we go to github.com/marketplace, if you do a search there for, say, Octopus, there you'll find, amongst other things, are GitHub actions. So these things here, excuse me, these things here are the GitHub actions that you can use to integrate GitHub actions with Octopus Deploy. So these are ones that we've created. So things like push a package, run a runbook, push build information to Octopus. This is like your commits, etc. This is really, really powerful stuff that you can use as part of this. In addition to that, we also have a app. If you don't want to construct that, you want this to automatically flow, you can use our app as well. So this allows you to do integration directly without having to provision API keys, etc. You just set this up, and we use OIDC, secure communication between servers, for this. So it allows you to do that. Or if you want, you can also kick these things off through things like Copilot. So if you're a fan of Copilot, you're into the AI thing, we have an extension for Copilot that you can use. I'll show you a demo of this in just a second. But you can integrate Copilot directly and talk to an Octopus instance to do automation, deployment automation, which is awesome. So we've got some questions in here. We got a question here from Christian. He says, in a nutshell, how is if Octopus is related to Argo CD? Argo CD, let's bring this up here for folks who, Argo CD. So Argo CD is a solution that is particularly tailored towards Kubernetes. Yes, there are many similarities between these tools. In fact, we are a contributor to Argo. So Octopus/Codefresh is a contributor to the Argo project. Argo has a bunch of capabilities to it. So Argo has facilities around things like workflows, Argo CD, Argo rollouts, events, etc. These are capabilities particular to Argo and is very much tailored towards Kubernetes deployments. We are more than that, but we do have integration points with Argo. If you're at all interested, you can see a solution that sits on top of this, which is called Codefresh. Go to codefresh.io. This is part of Octopus Deploy. This is something you can certainly use. And in fact, we actually have steps from the community that allow you to integrate with Argo as well. So if you're at all interested in doing integration with that, you can certainly do that as well. We're a little bit different in the sense that we target beyond more than just Kubernetes, etc. So there is a lot of similarities there. But obviously, if you're doing something around Kubernetes, etc., you can use one or the other. We have features in here as well that are worth mentioning. Great question, though. See, this is live. We're doing live questions, so that's great. So as I said before, kicking off an automation can be done via GitHub. Here's an example using Azure DevOps. So here I'm using pipelines, and we have integration directly here. If I wanted to author this in YAML, I certainly could do so, or I could utilize the steps that we have here for Octopus, which are listed here. In addition to that, we have extension points for, we have extensions or integration points with all the CI products out there. Name a CI process, we've probably seen it. So there's lots of ways, build servers that are available there. So I just mentioned two here, GitHub and and Azure DevOps or ADO. But I'm very much cognizant of the fact that people like to use other tools, which is fine. If your automation thing is wanting to be more hands-on, you can certainly use our CLI. We have a CLI available. We also have an API available that you can use. So we're API first, which means we have all the operations you're seeing here through the dashboard are done using an API. So every operation, like doing a deployment, creating a process, etc., that's all done via our API. So you can certainly target that if you wish, or you can target something like GitHub Copilot. So let me go ahead and jump over into VS Code here. So if you haven't seen Copilot chat, this is how it integrates within VS Code. You can see here that we have an integration point. This is the extension here. Hopefully you can see this. I'll just pump up the font a little bit. So here at the bottom, I have my extension. I can say things like hello. I already had this. I have this set up pointing to a sample instance here. And this is utilizing AI for us to do a query to perform operations. So in this instance, I'm connected to a sample instance here, which is this one here. So this dashboard here is reflective of what I'm doing here in GitHub Copilot. So I can just copy one of these commands. So I can say things like, show me the dashboard for the space. Show me the dashboard for my default space, which I've already pre-configured. And this one's pointing to the same one that I just showed you, that tenants. So here it's authoring that and outputting it as Markdown. So it's going to be, if I do the Alt tab here, this is this, is this, is this. So you can see there's car rental, there's car rental. So it is live data. I can do all kinds of operations here. This is available through our GitHub Copilot extension. So I can kick off deployments. I can do a variety of operations here. You can see some examples here. So here, we'll just scroll up to the top. Sorry, there's lots of preamble here. So these are some sample queries I can run. So I can say, show me the project dashboard, show me the runbook dashboard, summarize deployment logs, etc. So let's just copy one of these here. Summary deployment logs. Let's see if this works here. Summarize. Go back. Summarize the deployment logs for the latest deployment of the project Octopus shop in the development environment for the space called this. Now I've set up a default space. I don't have to add that default space aspect here, but I could certainly do that here. And so it's listing all the deployment logs associated with this. So that gives you a sense of how you can do this. And then you can click on links for things like what services were deployed, etc. So this is an integration point we have for this if you're at all curious. There's definitely a lot of capabilities there that you can use. All right, jumping back to the demo. Oh, we have another question here. So the question here is, what software/agent do we have to install on the target machine for Octopus Deploy to connect and do the deployment on the target machine? Great question. So earlier, when I set up my deployment targets, you'll notice that if I create a new deployment target here, we have these categories here. These are pointing to the various agents that you have to install in order for Octopus to communicate to this remote machine. So you set this up ahead of time, and we provide these abilities here. So if I wanted to, I could create, we give this a marketing term. It's called Tentacle, because we're going with the Octopus theme. We call it Tentacle, but basically Tentacle is a little piece of software that you install on your remote machine in order for it to be part of a deployment orchestration. So when you execute a deployment, you do so by targeting these machines. It communicates with those remote machines via Tentacle and then picks up work and does the work accordingly, dependent upon how you defined your deployment process. Taking a look at an example here, when I create a listening Tentacle, we set up, so this is something that you download and install on a remote machine, and then it will surface out a listening port, which is has a signature associated with it, so it has to provide this in order to secure communication. But it gives you things like a host name, etc. Oh, actually, let me remove your question here so you can see the rest of this. Sorry. So it gives you things like what is the host name, what port, what proxy, if anything, you want to set up. So this is how you establish a listening Tentacle. A polling Tentacle is something that obviously calls back, and this is just in the case of Windows. So if I'm wanting to set up a target to deploy to and it's running Windows, this is how I set it up. If I'm doing it via Kubernetes, I set up the Kubernetes agent here, and we have a dialog for doing that. We get you to run a Helm chart to help set this up. And if you go through the process of doing this, it will set you up for that as you're setting up the Kubernetes. Same thing goes for Linux. Same thing goes for cloud. So if you're setting these up as deployment targets, you can go ahead and do so. So that's the way you set that up, is through an agent. Great question. So hopefully that answers your question. I'm just looking at the question again here. And connect and do deployment to the target. So when you set this up and you have this set up ready to deploy to, you'll have these listed as targets. So let's take a look at another example here. These are all my spaces. So remember, we talked about spaces before. So if we take a look at some spaces here, let's take a look at let's take a look at an old example. We're deploying to IIS, for example. Let's see if we have some deployment. Okay, we don't have any deployment targets here. Let me set up for, let me see if I've got deployment targets set up for here. These ones may have gotten, okay, so we have an old polling tentacle set up. This is how it will look, but we'll share with you the health status of these things as you look at them. So, but when we have these set up, you'll set these up as as tentacles, and then we deploy to them accordingly. We do have some other examples here where you can take a look at that, which is fine. So awesome. We have another question here. Do we need to install these agents for each project, or can we create once and reuse it in different projects? Let's assume our project are related to database deployment. Yes, you set up once, and then it's set up in the configs, and then you're ready to deploy to it. So you can have this across multiple projects as part of your deployment. And then you set this up as part of what's called your infrastructure, which is why we separate it here. So if you notice that we separate our projects from our infrastructure and spaces, etc. But this is how you establish your deployment targets and be able to deploy them across projects. So yes, that's just how you set it up. Great question. Awesome. So I'll show you some examples of how this integrates. You can see, obviously, with Azure DevOps or GitHub or even Copilot, showing an instance of running inside of VS Code. There's lots of ways you can actually kick off these deployments accordingly, which is great. If at all you're interested in some of the features that are coming up, there's a great website you can check out, which is our roadmap. This is at roadmap.octopus.com. As I always like to tell people, this should be a bookmark, if not your homepage. If you're at all interested of features that we're looking at, either features that are under consideration, features that are planned, or features that have been released, you can go to this website and find out more. You can see we have some great features that are coming or that have been released. We typically ship to Octopus Cloud first before anything else. And the reason why is because it allows us to see how those features are doing in an environment that we have better control over. But you can see we've shipped a lot. We ship often. We ship every quarter. So we ship a lot of features there. And we basically, are very, very much cognizant of what customers are asking for. If you're at all curious, you can submit your own ideas here. Even vote how important these things are for you. Some features worth looking at, we've got things like config as code for runbooks that's coming. We're working on our Terraform provider. Features like ephemeral environments, these are all planned. And so you can see these are things that are coming in the future for Octopus itself. Great stuff. All right, so let's jump back now to our slides and round things out, answer any other questions you may have. So that was the demo. Hopefully now, by the end of this webinar, you've seen basically how Octopus works, and more importantly, and this is the most important thing for me, why you should use it, right? Octopus is a technology, a solution that allows you to automate your deployments and gives you the ability to do continuous delivery or deployments, depending on how you define CD. But basically, we are a CD tool, and we provide you a mechanism of doing this in a safe and sane manner. You can deploy on Friday, as I like to say, or even Sunday if you wish. We also looked at, in this webinar, fundamentals associated with Octopus. You saw things like a deployment process. You saw things like environments. You saw environment progression. You saw how we create a release, a snapshot of your various values for doing that. You saw how to create a deployment process from scratch. And believe me, when you start baking these deployment processes, they get really, really complex. But the great thing here is you're doing this all for automation. I've seen deployment processes that are tens, if not hundreds of steps. And these are oftentimes, very complex deployment processes. But the great thing is that Octopus just handles it, no problem. Away we go. We'll do the deployment, and you're done. So it's great. And finally, I showed you some examples of how to do to trigger a deployment process via a CI process or server. You can also do this with, Copilot. I mentioned the fact that we have APIs. We have a CLI as well, which is awesome. You can use any type of capability there that we have available. The reason why we have those capabilities is because oftentimes automation scenarios can differ. You may have a specific case that you want to support. Like, let's say I want to do the automation via a special script. no problem. You can call the API, away you go, or you can use the CLI for that if you wish to use that as an example. All right, so that is the end of my slides. I appreciate your time and attention, and just wanted to answer some questions that are coming in here. So the question is, in a single shot, how many deployment machines can we deploy? So we have examples of deploying across thousands of machines. So we test with this all the time internally. So we have customers that deploy to thousands and thousands and thousands of machines overnight as part of their deployment process. So yeah, it's certainly capable of doing lots of deployments. Now it may take some time, obviously, and that's not the fault necessarily of Octopus. It's more of a, there's network congestion, there's communication that it goes on, but we're certainly capable of having thousands of tentacles communicate back to Octopus and do deployments. So it's good, very good in that capability. So we scale very well, if that's your question. Awesome. So I have my details here. Don't forget, we also have our docs, which you can check out at /docs. Great resource there. We're adding to it all the time. There's our YouTube channel, which I failed to mention at the beginning, but if you go to our YouTube channel, there you'll find a whole bunch of webinars, videos. You'll find a live instance of this. Hopefully you're joining us from maybe one of those locations. We publish there at least twice, if not 3 times a week. We have a bunch of shows that we publish to, so feel free to like and subscribe, as they say. And then finally, as I mentioned before, you can reach me on this email if you want. If you have any questions, this is just me wasting time to see if there are any more questions. I don't see any other questions coming in, so there you go. Awesome stuff. All right, well, that wraps up yet another Octopus 101. We run these monthly, the second Wednesday, I believe, of every month, which is great. You can check out next month's, which is January, obviously, in the new year. And we'll be running another Octopus 101. This is a new experiment for us, by the way. So we're running these more in line with your time. So we have 3 now running. So we have 1 for Asia Pacific, 1 for Europe, and 1 for Americas, which is the one you're on right now. We'll do the same thing in January. So stay tuned for that. You'll find out more on our webinars site, which is octopus.com/webinars. But until then, happy holidays, happy New Year, and as we always like to say, happy deployments, everyone. Take care.